It's never encouraging for the team when their own coach believes that the best they can do before the game is a draw. But after the drastic recent defeats in local and mayoral elections, Rishi Sunak no longer dares to talk about victories. The general election, which is due to take place soon, could at least give the United Kingdom a hung parliament without clear majorities. That was predicted by the Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Government Party, and that should be an encouragement for his party colleagues not to give up all hope just yet. But after the opposition Labour Party has had a stable lead in the polls for years, after a series of lost by-elections for the Westminster Parliament, after the government's competence ratings have fallen sharply, hardly anyone in the Labour Party camp is confident that things will change for the better. No, the Conservative Party. Even the tried and tested method that sport clubs use in such situations, changing coaches, is now out of the question for the British Conservatives. It already has been used too often. Before the local council elections on the first weekend in May, there was much speculation in the parliamentary corridors that MPs who feared for their own seats might out Sunak from his chair in order to bring new momentum with a fresh face. But the revolt in the parliamentary palace did not take place. So Rishi Sunak has at least, unlike his three predecessors Theresa May, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, averted an inglorious Caesar's fate. It will not be his own entourage, but the voters who will have the power to end his term in office. But that can be no consolation to him in view of his consistent lack of success in the demographic assessments. It does not spare the Prime Minister the question of whether the damage to his party's image and difficulties are now so serious that he could not remedy them with his own efforts, or whether he himself is not the right person for the job. A look at the turbulent 14-year period of the Conservatives government is enough to establish that Sunak was certainly not his party's first choice for the top job. Rather, he rose to the key position of Chancellor of the Exchequer in the shadow of the popular narcissistic Boris Johnson and made a name for himself through rescue measures for the labour market and the economy during the corona pandemic. But after Johnson failed, he himself had not always taken the corona restrictions that he imposed on the entire country seriously. Sunak did not get the chance. Instead, the majority of the Conservative Party members voted against him in a primary election and for Liz Truss, who then led the British economy to the brink of the abyss with the prospect of unfunded tax cuts. Only after her odyssey was Sunak, now quickly praised by the members of this House of Commons factions, allowed to move into number 10 Downing Street. The persistence with which he pursued this move is an indication of his ambition, which can be seen as exemplary of the upward trajectory of an immigrant family. His parents are of Indian descent and African origin. They met in Southampton after emigrating from Kenya and Tanzania. Both achieved ambitious civic goals as a doctor and a self-employed pharmacist, which in turn enabled their children to receive a first-class education. Rishi, the eldest of three, attended the prestigious private Winchester College, where he became head boy. He studied politics and economics at Oxford and Stanford in the USA, interrupted by work as a financial manager at Goldman Sachs and at investment firms, most recently at his wealthy father-in-law's company. Thanks to his own income in the financial sector, but above all thanks to the wealth of his wife Akshata Murthy, the couple are on the Sunday Times list of the richest people in Britain, where they were ranked 222nd 2 years ago. Sunak likes to position himself in his party in the same position as Margaret Thatcher, against bureaucracy, and therefore also against membership of the EU, for free enterprise, for personal responsibility instead of social welfare. However, his efforts to take on the image of his predecessor do not seem very authentic. Thatcher, too, embodied a story of ascension, from her parents' grocery store to training as a scientist and becoming the Iron Lady. But Thatcher's self-made success and middle-class maxims gave her more credibility than Sunak's origins from a well-off academic household, even if Sunak sometimes described his mother's pharmacy as a kind of general store in party conference speeches. His image was much more effectively polished in public by news such as the fact that a new power line had to be laid to Sunak's property in his constituency in North Yorkshire in order to be able to start heating a swimming pool that had just been built there. It also emerged some time ago that the Prime Minister's wife did not pay tax on most of her dividends in Great Britain due to a special tax status. All of these circumstances tie Sunak less closely to his party than most of his predecessors. Added to this are his rather aloof nature and his more technocratic view of political activity. When the Prime Minister deliberately tries to counteract this image, for example, when he gives interviews with his wife in his private apartment or is photographed with a coffee mug at his desk, well, the desired effect does not always occur. Instead, the public is surprised that their head of government occasionally leaves the office to quickly make the beds in the apartment above the office. It's more in line with the existing speculation that his wife revealed that her husband keeps moving the dirty dishes in the dishwasher. The most recent irritation was triggered by a photo showing Sunak in Adidas Samba trainers. The photo sparked an intense internet debate about whether or not the shoes have lost their cult status now. So while the Prime Minister is having a hard time gaining access to the heart and soul of his nation with such actions, his efforts to gain rational recognition have not met with much success either. When he took office in October 22, he had the worst inbox imaginable on his desk, says Sunak looking back. He defined 5 goals against which he wanted to measure his progress in the future. Inflation should fall, economic output should increase, public debt should decrease, waiting times for treatment in the state healthcare system should be shortened, and the arrival of illegal migrants should be prevented. So far, the Prime Minister has achieved 1.5 of these goals. Inflation, as in other Western countries, has fallen almost to the level before Corona and the Ukraine war. And the number of refugees transported to the English coast by traffickers in rubber dinghies has fallen by 1/3 in the past year. But for the time being, he can do little to change the circumstances that are hindering his success. Brexit is reducing economic growth, hindering a solution to the refugee problem and exacerbating the shortage of staff in the health service. And moreover, British government policy since Tony Blair has been heavily geared towards short-term effects, toward striking successes. And the Conservatives' growing fear of impending defeat is accelerating the activism. Sunak spontaneously called an international summit on artificial intelligence, hastily presented a long-term personal plan for the public service, suddenly announced a fundamental increase in defense spending, and is now hoping that the first deputation flight to Rwanda will soon take off. The deportation plans for migrants have now become a test case for Sunak to see whether he can implement his promises, less in the eyes of the public, but all the more in the judgment of the revisionist conservative wing of his own party. This forces the former migrant child to demonstrate toughness in his example and to make statements such as that it is more important to secure our border and control illegal immigration than to be a member of a foreign jurisdiction. The court that Sunak is referring to is the European Court of Human Rights. The message that his statement is intended to convey is that his government is prepared to carry out a kind of further Brexit. Disregarding the orders of the Human Rights Court would ultimately lead to the United Kingdom leaving the Council of Europe. Sunak himself knows that such an act of national defiance is unlikely to win voters back for his party. At best, it can tame the zeal of the party's right wing to quickly look for a new leader. But his position is stable anyway after the recent lack of revolt, especially since Sunak himself has an important defensive weapon against internal party subversives. He can freely determine the date of the general election, with the formal consent of the king, of course. The only limit is the maximum length of the legislative period, which ends in January next year at the latest. The Prime Minister is therefore able to give the starting signal for the election campaign at any time, which would then make internal party power struggles impossible. Sunak, however, would rather wait for now in the hope that the situation will improve for him, and perhaps also in the prospect of being able to celebrate his 2-year anniversary in Downing Street in October. He celebrated his 1-year anniversary at his desk, and the official photos showed him there with a cup of tea and a nice piece of cake. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.